Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. A very warm welcome to our webinar, Education Wherever We Are. Thank you for joining, and of course, a very happy International Microorganism Day. I'm Beatrix Fahnert, the section editor for professional development of FEMS Microbiology letters. But before I continue, let us just say a quick hello to our speakers. We've got Nathan Basiliko and Varun Gupta. We've got Ignacio López-Goñi and Manuel Sanchez. Hello, everyone. Unfortunately, we can't, of course, see our audience, but hopefully you can see as well. So just some very brief, quick housekeeping. As you may know, microphones are muted for everyone as well, and using the hands up function is not something we would be usually doing during our webinar. So please enter your questions in the question box. We've been operating virtually for quite a few months, but of course we can't predict or prevent any issues with connection or bandwidth. So if the speaker drops out, the other will cover and we keep going. If I drop out, hopefully that doesn't happen, but it helps to have a plan. Our speakers just continue and our FEMS colleagues take over for the questions. But back to the more interesting business. I already mentioned professional development section in FEMS Microbiology letters. It serves to provide microbiologists at various career stages with timely articles on issues and challenges facing the field, such as matters of education and training. You hopefully have already seen some of our papers. Unbelievable, we are already in our 6th year. And meanwhile, our readership and also our author base have quite extended areas of life sciences, far beyond given the inherent transferability of our content. But that's really something we're very happy and proud of. We've already produced 3 topical thematic issues in education, a career series, and have quick response virtual special issues, which is where this one is coming in. Education Wherever We Are. It was swiftly launched in response to moving to remote teaching in early spring, drawing on papers from the section that at the time offered suggestions to educators in terms of being remote and on online provision as well. We will cover 2 areas today in more detail as food for thought in preparation of the next academic year that's just around the corner or even already with you. So we'll better be prepared. And of course, in the section, there are many more papers that would give you some ideas, for instance, on active, collaborative, authentic learning, problem-based, flipped learning, gamification, anything that's particularly important when engaging students remotely or as part of a blended approach. But for today, we have 2 topics, each about 15 minutes, and then a question-answer session for the rest of the time to the panel. So I'll keep an eye on your questions that you put in the question box, and we go from there. Now, for our first topic, I'll be brief, I promise, because it will be so much more entertaining when our speakers will be starting. Our first speakers both come from Canada. We have Nathan Basiliko, based at Laurentian University, and Varun Gupta, based at Maven Water and Environment. They will cover bringing guest scientists to the university biology classroom via the web, which is based on one of the papers in our first year, actually. At the time, it was highlighting very innovative practice, and the approach now, of course, allows us to operate during a public health crisis. I think subsequently it will remain quite a routine tool, but the important point is to use it well and meaningfully. This is where our speakers come in today. So video conferencing providing a fantastic opportunity for students at any stage to not only have access to their own lecturers, but to guest lecturers, and use it in fantastic contests like a journal club setting. Enough from me, over to our speakers.
Okay, great. So can you see our presentation now?
Yes.
Okay, super. So thanks very much, Beatrix, for the introduction. So this presentation is focused around a teaching initiative I began using in courses in the late 2000s, first at the University of Toronto and now at Laurentian University. And our co-presenter, Dr. Varun Gupta, was both a former student who participated in these classes when he was an undergrad and master's student working with me at the University of Toronto. And then after he left my group for his PhD and beyond that, he's joined classes of mine at Laurentian as a guest scientist. So I'm going to lead off the presentation first by giving some brief context about the teaching research nexus in universities to help frame the initiative. And then I'll describe what we did and touch on what I think worked well and not so well. And then hand it over to Varun, who can probably do a much better job of saying what worked well and not so well, coming from the perspective of having been a former student and guest. And then Varun will end the presentation by raising issues and discussion questions about this initiative now that we're 7 months into this global COVID-19 pandemic and everybody in post-secondary education is relying on web teleconferencing for teaching. So Varun, this morning, his time, it's 8 a.m. in Saskatoon in the heart of the Canadian prairies. I'm in Sudbury, Ontario on the Precambrian Shield with lots of forest and rock and lakes. And Varun and I both have expertise in environmental microbiology. So I lean more towards being a soil scientist and an ecosystem ecologist, while Varun pushes more towards the applied and industrial microbiology realm. And I note this to say that neither of us are education researchers. So we contributed this commentary paper, but we're edging out of our own realm of research expertise. So a key question is that, as university faculty members, does our training and work as researchers make us better educators? And you might think that there's an opportunity to go beyond basics in a classroom and have a better sense of the how, kind of the pulse on the epistemology, how new data and how new knowledge are generated, because we generate some of that new data and knowledge ourselves. And as well, maybe the now, the cutting edge, if not coming from our own labs, just because we have a better grasp on how to find the most up-to-date and cutting edge disseminated research. But the short answer to this question is still no, that there's generally no improvements in educational outcomes when courses are taught by faculty who are hired and rewarded as being excellent researchers. And now I have to apologize that my context is a bit more representative of Canadian universities, but nevertheless, there's still this idea that research-informed teaching is the crux of the university experience. Despite that, I can at least say for myself, I have no formal teacher training. Our expertise as researchers is inherently very narrow, while most courses are quite comprehensive. So I teach Introduction to Microbiology, Applied and Environmental Microbiology, and Ecosystem Ecology courses. And at the very best, in the upper level classes, I might put 5% of the course material drawing on my own research group. And I do this even more to show students about the research process in general, not because it's necessarily the most relevant material. And I personally find that my teaching enhances my research program so much more than my research enhances my teaching. But nevertheless, there are still ways that research programs can be leveraged to enhance course-based learning outcomes. And this has been studied and published on and reviewed. So in a synthesis paper by Prince and others, they suggested some specific strategies for integrating teaching and research, ways of bringing research into the classroom, involving undergraduates in research projects. So in Canada, the common way to do this is through an honors thesis project, or maybe even broadening the definition of scholarship beyond only doing frontier disciplinary research. Let labs reinvent the wheel more because it's such a good training tool. And maybe that's a goal of what undergraduate teaching laboratories try to do. So our initiative, bringing guest scientists to the classroom, tries to draw on the first one. But we also have aimed to overcome this issue of a single instructor having a very narrow research focus. Well, most classes are comprehensive, or most courses are comprehensive. So I've used this in my smaller classes, so in the upper level undergraduate and introductory graduate courses in environmental microbiology and ecosystem ecology since the early 2000s. And the gist of it is that I arrange for a suite of national and international researchers to join us virtually via the web and interact with students about specific journal articles, as well as their broader experiences and perspectives as researchers. I think in my busiest course, I had 8 guests, and would generally do this during the laboratory or the seminar sections of a course. So it's meant to complement a lecture-based material. Mainly draw from faculty members at universities, but also routinely do go to government researchers, nationally and provincially here. I've had some government researchers from national labs in the US, as well as the private sector, and that's what Varun would represent now. Do my best to choose scientists based on how their research fits into weekly course topics. So for example, one guest had authored a paper that we read describing a novel approach to a hydrocarbon degrading bacterium that they'd isolated from a contaminated site, and that fit well with that week's lecture content on bioremediation and prior week's content on challenges in the environmental microbiology toolbox, the sort of technical approaches. Students would read 1 or 2 papers where the guest was either the lead or the senior author, and then I'd have them prepare discussion questions before we started. So here's some pictures over the years of different classroom settings. You can see how technology's evolved since the late 2000s. I think the photo in the lower right with the yellow circle is around Varun in 2009, and the screens have gotten bigger. So usually we'd have the class meet half an hour before we join with our guest and put students in small groups of maybe 2 to 4, where they would go over their discussion questions, try to clarify any issues with the articles amongst themselves. That gave me time to connect, kind of deal with the technical connection issues with the guests, which now we're all pros at, but 11 years ago I struggled with. And then the guest would join, and I would have prompted them to begin with an overview of their academic path. So where and what they studied, where they've worked, the scope of their current research programs or their current jobs if they're not in a university setting still. And then I'd ask them to give background about the papers at hand. Where did the initial impetus for the research come from? If the work was part of a student thesis, where was the funding from? What were the roles of different co-authors? And then finally, what were some of the experiences and challenges encountered in the review and publication process? We then turn it over to the students and ask them to start by introducing themselves and then asking questions about the papers. And this would, depending on the papers and the class and the personality of the guest, this would kind of last different amounts of time and be a little more forced or a little more organic, depending on the situation. And then nearing the end, when that was kind of running out of steam, I'd prompt the guests to talk to us about what academia is like at their home institution and in their home country if they're not from Canada, and discuss how that compares to what we're familiar with. So some interesting twists and thoughts that have come up. We had one guest, when he responded and said, sure, he said, I've just had a paper rejected, and I'm going to send it to you right out of the garbage pail with the reviews and the associate editor's critique. So have your students read this and read the reviews and see if they think it's fair. And it was really a neat chance to see kind of behind the scenes of the peer review process. In an applied environmental microbiology course I teach regularly, he sadly passed away, but the author of our textbook, Environmental Microbiology, had joined for a number of years, Gene Madsen from the US. And he would give us papers from his research group, but also talk about what it's like to have turned his own university class into a textbook and then go through the producing new editions in a field that it technically evolves quite quickly. And that was really a neat perspective, and let students see see someone that they had been experiencing through the textbook the whole term. We had Rich Bowden, the editor-in-chief of FEMS Microbiology Letters, join, which was very cool. And Rich provided us with articles on microbial sulfur cycling, which fit well with the topic at hand, but really a unique perspective on the behind the scenes peer review and publication process. And I, as well as the students, I learned a lot hearing from Rich in that format. I kind of on average, and it depends whether or not, the scope of the papers and the size and the makeup of the class, but I think on average students get as much information and satisfaction from the impromptu presentation by the guest and their perspectives on post-secondary education, as well as the specific paper and paper discussion. Time zones are challenging. I don't have a lot of control over when the lab sections of my classes are scheduled. So an afternoon class in Eastern Canada is challenging to connect with, with Western Europeans, for example, and that somehow that to some extent helps dictate whom we get. And admittedly, I do draw more on my friends and colleagues. When I started this initiative out, I tried to go to people whom I thought were just the best and the paper that fit the best with the topic. it didn't work as well. And I found I did better choosing people whose personalities I knew and whom I knew I could kind of count on for a certain type of interaction. But admittedly, that's really limited the topic area to some extent. Okay, so for now, I'm going to turn it over to Varun, who's had personal experience both as a student and a guest in this.
Thank you, Nate. So Nate provided a really nice overview of how this course was received and delivered over the last 10 years. I'm going to focus more on my personal experience because I was both student and a guest speaker later on. So when I took this course back in my upper year undergrad, I think I was fourth year, this opportunity was very interesting because, you know, we all read books and like, you know, and articles, but we really get an opportunity to ask questions directly to the authors who wrote those papers. So on one hand, it was very interesting. On the other hand, as an undergraduate, it was a bit nerve-wracking to come up with questions and like, hey, what can you ask these authors? But having those interactions really provided a unique insight into articles and research that was just not simply available by reading it. Like case in point, methodology section. It is usually written cut and dry, but there's so much goes behind the scene when you actually designing a study. So having that insight not only made the research sound very appealing, it also made it very accessible. And as an undergrad student, I always aspire to have at least one publication in my lifetime. So seeing that, I was like, okay, you know what? This is something I can achieve and I can do. Fast forward during my PhD studies, now all of a sudden the roles were reversed, and the classroom was reading and the classroom were reading my papers. So right away, it was a rewarding experience for me to begin with. But what I found interesting was the aspect of research students were asking me questions about, and what they were taking it out of it was different from what I was expecting them to ask me about the research. So it was just nice to have that different perspective. Personally, I also found students were really keen to know what was the original inspiration behind the research idea, why I chose that topic in particular. And I guess being a young PhD student at that time, they were relating more to me, and they were thinking about grad studies as well. So there was like right away there was a good connection to begin with. Can you go to the next slide, Nate? So moving to 2020, when we are living in a COVID pandemic era where majority of the courses are being taught online. Video conferencing has become common, and technology barriers are vastly reduced, at least when compared to 2009. And most people are very comfortable doing webinars, Zoom meetings, everything like that. So I would say the current environment is primed to utilize this type of teaching strategy in our virtual classroom to bring scientists to their classrooms. So what are some benefits and considerations and some drawbacks? So right away, the increased participation, can talk, overall satisfaction, and being able to explain complex topics. And I would say, like, you know, having this type of environment, you not only can bring scientists and academics, you can also bring industry experts who are also being, you know, like they are in the field. And if your course is more applied basis, you can bring consultant, and I'm sure they'll be happy to share their experience and knowledge to the to the broader public. And overall, having this interaction increases the research engagement. However, since everyone is moving towards online courses this year, and teaching faculty who were not online prior to this are being asked to do online, the availability might become more tighter to find them to commit to this thing. And also there's also Zoom fatigue and technology overload to consider.
All right, so then just to quickly summarize, so that we feel this initiative offers one avenue for effective classroom teaching informed by primary research. Bringing multiple guests helps overcome the limited nature of one single instructor's research area, and provides a whole bunch of different perspectives on how questions are asked and answered around the world to complement the broader scope of a semester-long course. It's quite easy to implement. And I think it's a neat way to give kind of students an exciting behind the scenes look of how we generate knowledge. So with that, we'll stop, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. We heard about research teaching nexus, in addition to video conferencing involving employers coping with a rejected paper, great context. And of course, to hear both from the student and the teacher perspective. So wonderful insight. And I'm looking forward to the questions from the audience later to continue this discussion and hear all your insights. And probably quite surprising viewpoints, unexpected viewpoints. Now, after this first part to our webinar, we now welcome our second speakers. Both are from Spain. We've got Ignacio López-Goñi, based at University of Navarra, and Manuel Sánchez, based at University of Miguel Hernandez. They will combine two papers in an interesting take on massive open online courses, or MOOCs shortly, and on Twitter as a platform. Using Twitter in context of learning is very suitable, from engaging with already posted tweets during a learning activity to producing tweets or series of tweets, or an even more complex structure of tweets like MOOCs as a learning activity. But again, I shouldn't be talking about it because we have our experts here. Over to you.
Now, do you hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. Did you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay, let's go. Okay, we want to thanks to Beatrix, Fahnert, and FEMS to this invitation. This part of the webinar has two parts. In the first one, we are going to try to convince you to use Twitter for science communication. And in the second part, we will describe our experience using Twitter to teach microbiology, an activity that we summarize as MicroMOOC. My name is Ignacio López-Goñi, and I work in the University of Navarra in Spain, and also is here with me Manuel Sánchez from the University of Miguel Hernandez, also in Spain. Currently, most people are users of social networks like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and have incorporated them in their lives. These are already being used for learning, discovering, searching, storing, and especially for sharing knowledge and information. In this slide, we show you what is happening in 1 minute on the web. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of messages, videos, or tweets. We can find everything, or almost everything, on the net. Image, infographics, video, news, blogs, interviews, games. For example, in this is a wonderful picture of Streptococcus, a picture that you can only find in the internet. Many people, particularly the younger generations, consider conventional communication channels like email as too formal. My son tells me email is for all people. I want to show you a short video. In this video, you see a baby first use a video tablet, an iPad, and it works. And then he uses a paper magazine, and it doesn't work. Look how she moves his fingers. These are the new generation. Thus, the cyberspace offers new paths for science communication, social learning, and collaborative teaching. A few years ago, the discussion was on whether we should have a blog or not. But now, even a blog makes little sense if you do not combine it with social networks as Twitter. Let me try to convince you to use Twitter for science communication. Twitter is one of the most popular social networks. It consists of a microblogging service that allows sharing short messages as well as including images, video, links to other sites, and so on. If you want an international publication, design it by yourself, online and free, that gives you information in real time, updated constantly, this is Twitter. Should we use Twitter? In summary, if you live in the 21st century, yes. But even in a non-communist country, you should use Twitter with caution. Today, major academic publishers, the most important scientific journals, several scientific societies and research centers, science and faculty have a Twitter account. You can be a follower of a Nobel Prize or Justin Bieber if you want. There are several reasons why every microbiologist should be on Twitter. Many use Twitter to increase their, but also to enhance your visibility worldwide. When you publish a scientific paper, you can reach ideally a few hundred people. But if you use social media to announce and share your publication, the number of potential readers increase significantly. The old motto, publish or perish, he didn't publish, so he perished, should be changed for visible or vanish. Note that more than 7,000 papers are published every day, and many will never be quoted or read. Another good reason to be on Twitter is the promotion of public engagement with science, as social networks have the potential to transform dialogue between science and society. And this is especially important today in the midst of a pandemic. And finally, another good reason is that it's funny and enjoyable. Let's now explain how we use Twitter for teaching and sharing science. The first step, obviously, is to have a Twitter account. Note that you can share a lot of concepts in only 280 characters. Sometimes it's difficult, but trying again. This is a tweet, and in a tweet, you can have a lot of information. In a tweet, you can link to others. You can link to a web page, add a hashtag, send a direct message, retweet, answer, make a thread joining one tweet after another. There is a huge amount of information in only one tweet. Some years ago, a group of enthusiastic microbiologists had the initiative to organize microbiology course via Twitter, always with the hashtag #MicroMOOC. Micro for microbiology, and because we use microblogging, Twitter, and MOOC for massive online open course. First, you must choose a topic, then search in internet for information and construct your history. Then you build your class in headlines. Each idea, one tweet. 30, 40 tweets is a class. Use always simple and concise language. Vaccines side effects are better than the disease they prevent. And then you call your potential students through social networks because your public is worldwide. During the last year, we have done several courses, some with the Spanish Society for Microbiology with the hashtag #MicroMOOCSEM and #MicroMOOCSEM2, and the last one with the collaboration of FEMS. Let me show you this last one that we call EuroMicroMOOC. This course was used from October to November in 2018. 3 days a week, every day one lesson, every lesson with 30, 40 tweets. Participate 21 professors from different research centers from 9 countries in Europe, USA, and South Korea, and participate in the course. They taught 21 lessons. After the course, all lessons were stored in a well called Wakelet. Let's go now to see one of these lessons. In this web page, we have all the classes, the 21 classes from different topics, from vaccines, genomics, antimicrobial resistance, bacteriophages. Let's see one of these classes, industrial microbiology. As you can see here, let's go one of these lessons. As you can see, a lesson is a list of tweets, each of one with a lot of information. You can add a picture, a diagram. You can link to a paper. Let's go to a paper. For example, this one. You have information for a specific paper, or you can link to, this is about Louis Pasteur, information about Louis Pasteur, or you can link to a video. If you read one tweet behind the other, you have the complete history, the complete lesson. And in the web page weekly, we have its lesson, we have all the codes. And what were the results? In the Euro MicroMock course, we shared hundreds of tweets, emails, links, and videos. We got more than 3 million of users that saw posts containing the hashtag Euro MicroMock, and more than 47 million of Twitter impressions. Twitter impressions means times that users have seen a post containing the hashtag EuroMicroMock. The course was followed worldwide. 78% of the followers were in Europe, 10% in Latin America countries, 6% in the USA, and 5% from other countries. In this slide, we show you the advantage, the benefits of this kind of MicroMock courses. Increase the visibility of the society, the microbiology society, interact with other colleagues, put the microbiology in press and social networks. We have a repository of links and economic cost, which is 0 euros. And in the next slide, we have the disadvantage. Nothing. There's no disadvantage. Well, yes, MicroMock classes by Twitter can be addictive. And you don't know how hard it is for me to get your attention since you are hooked on social networks. Cadena. We want to finish our talk showing some of the papers in which we describe this initiative in detail and where you can find more information about these MicroMock courses, and especially the Euro MicroMock. That's all, and thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you both very much for all these insights into using technology effectively for communication for scientific audiences and lay audiences in or outside the classroom, and particularly when it's fast-paced. So actually, thank you for making me feel old, or telling me through your son's words that I'm old because I use email. Now, these were our first two topics, or our actual 2 topics for today, and we now want to move on to our question and answer section. So while our speakers switch their camera on all again and our audience is getting ready to type questions in the question box so that I can see them, I will just start very lightheartedly, so not to take anything away. Firstly, with video conferencing, are your students sometimes suggesting to get more external speakers in because they actually have seen enough of you yourself? Have you had those?
I think tongue in cheek, they certainly say that, and they just see that there's a lot of different ways of being an academic, I suppose, both in terms of the teaching and presentation styles. I guess they would see that from different faculty members across courses, but when it comes to sort of seeing the diversity of approaches to doing research, even within the same field, and definitely I would have guests who say contradictory things to what I've been telling students during the term, and I think that's good, right? It makes them see that they're this isn't, not everything's exactly black and white, and a lot of it does boil down to approach, and so I think Of course, they're sick of me, but beyond that, I think they really do appreciate seeing different perspectives on, within one course.
Okay, and a little question to our Twitter presenters. Did you take to it straight away, or was it something that took a little bit convincing from someone else?
Manuel?
Well, Ignacio was the organizer, the mastermind behind the Twitter micromock was Ignacio. He has the idea and then start to enroll with the other microbiologists in the first time. Well, was the first micromock was such as a sex that then we organized the second that was with the other Spanish language countries from South America. And then FEMS will say, "Oh, this is great. You should organize another one." But for Europe, but this was Nacho, the mastermind of the course. And well, we use this later for another things. For example, I use the idea of Nacho. For example, I use for my students. I try that they, for example, make a Twitter thread by use base it in a scientific paper, for example. It's one of the ideas.
That's great. I see that we have something coming in from the audience for some reason.
Nacho wants to say something.
Oh, please go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. Only one point. That now, for example, we are using these micromock which are stored in the Wakelate way. We are using with our students in the university, as we can keep this information in Wakelate, we can use again, and there is such amount of information that we use also in the university now, in the university classes.
Okay, that's good. And have the students seen any difference, or do they show any difference in behavior, whether they would be using Twitter for their educational or scientific context as opposed to their social activities? Do they behave any different?
In my case, I found that the younger students prefers, for example, Instagram instead of Twitter. But this is one thing that is changing right now. The problem with Instagram is that you can put information such as link or links to other to the papers on other pages. So that's a problem. But well, it's a class activity to make something with Twitter, because as Ignacio said, it has a lot of advantage for the scientific community.
Excellent. So I see that we have things coming in from the audience. Unfortunately, there must be a little technical glitch because it's only extremely small for me to see. So I'm sort of trying to squint onto my screen, and I actually can only sort of see half a line. So I'll be trying to be able to get an idea of what the questions are mainly about. So please bear with me. And while I'm identifying the main themes from the audience, please, speakers, feel free to continue some of the thoughts we've developed already. I can see that the first entry from the audience is not so much a question, but a comment, which is about in context of a peer review, the author hasn't got that much opportunity to actually elaborate on original inspirations and all the other things that have contributed to the paper, never mind all the hard work or things that didn't really work necessarily. So having this opportunity for students to discuss with paper authors is pretty much invaluable. So that was a wonderful comment there. If you want to cover that amongst yourselves as speakers, while I'm desperately trying to read the next question.
Varun, do you want to comment on that? I think you mentioned this.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, I mean, I also, the peer review aspect of it is also very important, because a lot of, like, I mean, a lot of students don't realize how much effort it goes to get a paper published, and all the hoops you have to jump through to get it peer reviewed. So the first time even I saw that process, I was blown away. It's like, wow, like, it is quite critical, and it is quite in-depth review of the paper. So having that perspective even to students, you know, it is invaluable, as you know, as the comment said. But overall inspiration, I think, like, it really comes down to motivation behind why you want to pursue something. And I think a lot of times students feels like, I mean, like, I'm just going back to my undergrad age time when I'm thinking is, why did I chose that research topic? It's just something that I found inherently intriguing, and as a kid, I may be able to tackle this. And it was just a small idea at that time. But to explain to students that a lot of research takes a lot of time and effort and perseverance more than anything else. You need to just keep trying the experiments and see what happens. Providing that context, again, it does not come across in an article, because in an article you do protocol A, you do protocol B, and you get C, and all you do is write up, right? It's very simplified. But so having that context just makes it that much real.
Absolutely. And I could now read the next question, which is for our Twitter speakers. The question was, would students learn more when engaging with Twitter-related learning activities as opposed to what we would consider traditional? And also, would you be using it in sort of more classical contexts, like anything that then is also assessed?
Well, since I used Twitter, I used to make like a questionnaire for the student at the end of the course, and asking them if they prefer the Twitter or the classical lesson, no? For example, in some subjects. Usually depends of the subject. If it's very complex, I think that they want something more deeper. But this is subject, let's say simple, like for example, the cell wall structure. They prefer maybe the Twitter because they have the ideas.
Okay, I can see another question. How do you compete with anything that is not scientific? Influencers that may be not use evidence-based arguments or draw on science. How do you deal with that with the students?
The influencer, well, it's let's see. It's okay. I think that the problem with the influencer is more not for the student, but for the society in general. Okay, because our student list, we try to teach them to think critically. But sometimes we have discussions about, for example, here in my country recently, a famous singer, for example, start to say that the vaccines doesn't work. And well, it was something that we discussed in our class at the end of one of the classes about vaccines, and we discussed this thing that because this singer is very famous in my country, and a lot of people, well, start to think, oh, well, this he has right about this. But I think that the important thing is that you should try to teach the student how to make the exposition of the different points to let me think. Wait a moment. No, to say that
help each other out.
Yeah, that this to find the arguments that, for example, say no, vaccines are safe and are effective, and they should check because they are drugs. I mean, they should have a clinical trial. They are not to say to the student that how to rely on science and the source, the trust to trust in the source of information.
Yeah. So the whole critical analysis starts, and then of course that's the skills we want to develop as well. So we're not just teaching through the medium of Twitter. I can see more questions coming in, and because I can always only see half a line, I can't see how many there is. So I can promise our audience that if we haven't got through all of the important ones by the end, we'll follow them up subsequently, so they won't get lost, which is great. I have one for our video conferencing team, which is about, are there any side effects to the students or education if all the learning activities are now global and web-based? And while I give you a moment to think about that, I have also one that I can answer directly. When students are taking all these classes, how could that potentially translate into some evidence on their CV? So there are some aspects, for instance, micro-credentials and badging, where students can collect all these achievements and put them together in an achievement portfolio. And of course, some of the webinars are offered from famous institutions, so that's all good there. So any side effects, video conferencing team, aside from being on screen close up?
Boy, that's a really great question. And I think when we started this, it was just such a small part of otherwise very traditional classroom course delivery, complemented with lab exercises and some, sometimes some field exercises. And then this was sort of a neat extra thing, right, that we'd be tacking on. And it was a bit more novel I guess people were using Skype quite a bit in the late 2000s, but less so in a post-secondary educational context, at least as I knew. But that's a really good point. Now that this is becoming the norm, I mean, I sort of think, Beatrix and I were laughing, it's kind of outdated now, right? It was 5 years ago we wrote this commentary, and like Varun had said, there, people are getting Zoom fatigue, and maybe the exciting new thing would be being back in the classroom in person and having that traditional contact. So I don't have a perfect answer, and I think it's something that we're gonna see, and there's going to be a lot of studies coming out as the kind of COVID isolation continues in education. So I think it's a really good point. I don't have the perfect answer. I think this is a lot less novel, and everyone's probably doing this now anyway. So.
The tool is less novel, but of course making it really meaningful is just an ongoing and potentially just having started conversation when we don't use it as an ad hoc response to not being able to leave the house or not being allowed to use the house, but proactively doing that actually for the next academic year for quite some time. And we know that it's about engaging the students through it. If you're not in the same room, what makes someone join you? What makes someone not join you? And would they pay attention? So some of the aspects of engaging students in class in person, which is also challenging. Not everyone who is in the room necessarily listens to you. I don't kid myself there. Of course, I just speak for myself. So we have other challenges there. But have you seen a sort of blurring of when students use social media or video tools, video conferencing tools, between their educational or work-related activities and their social activities? It's going probably more in a 24/7, and then having those borderlines, healthy borderlines as well, or where it's healthy to cross them, is another conversation as well. Have you seen any difference in your colleagues, either of you on the MOOC side or on the video side? Have you reported anything I saw a cartoon some time ago where someone was in a working environment and something more domestic behind, but I forgot if I'm working from home or if I'm living at work. So any comments on that?
Go on, Manuel.
Well, the question was for us or for?
Well, for anyone, because it affects everything. So please go ahead and shoot.
Okay, yeah, okay. That's well. My personal experience was that, like the cartoon, like I don't know if I was working in my home, I was in my home or I was home in my work, because at the end was with the confinement, we spent from March to July in our houses, making the things. We can't came to our work for nothing. I mean, yes, we start to go to the job in July at the end, but it was at the end of the courses, the classes. Sorry. So in my case, it was like the cartoon.
I would just add that. So I'm a consultant right now. So when this whole COVID isolation happened, we switched to online meetings all the time. And all of a sudden, there were a couple of weeks I was 7 hours video call for 2 weeks straight. And I can tell you from that experience, it was more exhausting than any in-person meetings I've ever been for 7 hours. It's also partially because like the camera is directly facing you and you're seeing everyone, you're overly stimulated just by visually and everything. And so my recommendation would be like, turn on camera if you're comfortable to do so, and maybe turn on your camera when you're actually talking. And other than that, you can turn it off, keep the bandwidth low, and you can kind of somewhat relax mentally and then but still be active listener and participant.
Yes, and I can see that a comment from the audience is that, of course, students are not having the hands-on experience they would otherwise have. So that is one of the challenges for students to then reintegrate into the situation, and particularly if they are at the more end of their education and are supposed to apply things in the real world, which they then haven't seen for a while, or more the new students who actually haven't seen the hands-on experience, and then transition happens at a different time and in a different way. So they are some of those challenges. The other challenge we have is that our time is coming to an end, which is really a pity. I definitely enjoyed it. I hope our audience as well. And I guess the audience will join me in thanking you all. But I think the speakers join me in thanking the audience for attending and asking questions, because without audience, nothing would have happened. Like, you know, if we want to run an online lecture and no one turns up, nothing happens, or no one reads our tweets. So many thanks to everyone. The questions were mainly around pros and cons and how to get it right. So no surprise there. And we will be looking at questions if I have overlooked any, and then, as promised, follow them up. So this is wonderful. Many thanks to everyone. I would like, of course, to invite our audience and the speakers to continue reading our papers in the FEMS Microbiology Letters professional development section. I'll get it out, it's a mouthful. And even, you know, submit papers, submit manuscripts. Now, we heard nothing always works straight away, and we can't read that in the manuscripts, but we know what goes into it. So I'm looking forward to reading them. And if you have any queries about submitting, don't hesitate, get in touch with me. I'm the section editor. So many thanks. All the best to everyone for the rest of the day. Importantly, for your next academic year, everyone, good health, good spirits for you and your loved ones. Stay safe and well, wherever you are. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Beatrix. Thanks, Stefan.